The girl counted her coins on the floor of docking bay 9, lips moving, one talon pressing each disc flat against the grating. 3 coins, 2 aluminum depot tokens from Waystation Hellos, 1 real credit minted on Earth, worn so smooth the face on it was just a ghost of a man she didn't recognize. She counted them again. The answer was still 3. She had been told by the woman at the information kiosk, a human woman with red streaks in her hair who smelled like synthetic cinnamon, that a human father cost money. The woman had not said this directly. She had said that everything on Hello's station cost money. The girl had extrapolated. She was good at extrapolating. The kiosk woman had not said how much a father cost. This was a problem. The girl folded her 3 coins into the small pouch she wore around her neck, stood up on her secondary legs, and went looking for someone to ask. Master Gunnery Sergeant Rail Kovac was not having a good morning. He was technically on leave. He had been on leave for 11 days. He was supposed to use this leave to decompress, which was the word the fleet's medical officer used when she meant stop waking up at 300 screaming and please for the love of everything stop starting fights in the mess hall. He had been told to take his leave on a civilian way station. He had been told to eat real food, drink moderate amounts of alcohol, and interact with non-military personnel in a low-stakes environment. He was currently sitting on a cargo crate in docking bay 9, eating a cold flatbread that tasted like nothing, drinking coffee that tasted like regret, and watching a freighter crew argue about manifest discrepancies. This was, by his current standards, an excellent morning. Nobody had tried to shoot him. Nobody had bled on him. The flatbread was not actively offensive. He was managing. He was 41 years old. He had been managing things since he was 17, which was when he had signed the fleet enlistment papers, and his mother had cried in a way that seemed disproportionate at the time, but that he now understood completely. He had managed 12 years of active service. He had managed the Kepler campaign, 3 months of grinding attrition warfare across asteroid fields that smelled like sulfur and burning meat. He had managed the loss of 11 people he had personally trained, 9 of whom he still named when he couldn't sleep. He had not managed to figure out what to do with himself on a day off. The alien girl appeared from between 2 cargo containers and stopped directly in front of him with the specific kind of stillness that very small creatures use when they're not sure if something large is going to eat them. She was Velhari, he could tell that much. Gray-blue skin, secondary joints in the arms that made humans stare, the large amber eyes with the vertical pupils that the fleet's xenobiology files described as striking, and that children on fleet ships inevitably called cat eyes until their parents made them stop. She was young, very young, judging by the underdeveloped crest along her skull. Maybe 11 standard years by human reckoning, maybe 12. She was wearing a vest that was too large for her, the kind of surplus fleet gear that got sold in second-hand markets on stations like this one. And she was carrying a small pouch around her neck that she was clutching with both hands. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. "You're a soldier," she said. Her standard was careful, a little formal, the way it got when someone learned it from a text program rather than from people. "I can tell from your posture." "Former soldier, I'm on leave." "What does leave mean?" "Means I'm not working right now." She considered this. "So you have time?" "I have time, yeah." "Good," she said. She opened her pouch and took out 3 coins. She held them out in both hands, which was, he dimly remembered from the Xeno files, the Velhari gesture for offering something important. "I would like to purchase a father. I have 3 coins. I counted them twice." He stared at her. She stared back, patient and serious, and not even slightly aware that she had just said something that was going to live in his head for the rest of his life. "Kid," he said slowly, "that's not how fathers work." "I am aware," she said, with a dignity that would have been impressive in someone 4 times her age. That I may not have enough, I am prepared to negotiate. Her name was Sci-Fi, which she told him meant star counter in the old Velhari tongue, though she said it in a way that suggested she found this translation inadequate. She had been on Hello's station for 6 days. Before that, she had been on a transport ship for 22 days. Before that, she had been on the Velhari colony world of Myra's Reach, which was where she had been born and where, for reasons she described with a flatness that was worse than grief, she was not able to go back to. He bought her food from the nearest vendor stall. She picked something that looked like steamed grain wrapped in dark leaves, which the vendor assured him was compatible with Velhari biology. And she sat across from him on a second cargo crate and ate with a precision that suggested she was rationing, portioning every bite, making it last. "Where are your people?" he asked. "I don't have people," she said. "Velhari travel in family groups, extended networks." She looked at him with her amber eyes. "You know about Velhari." "I've served alongside Velhari, know the basics. My family network was my mother and my grandmother and my grandmother's sister. My grandmother's sister died 2 years ago. My grandmother died 11 months ago. My mother died 43 days ago on the transport between Myra's Reach and Velhari Prime." She said it the same way she described the travel time, factual and flat and careful. "I was trying to reach the Velhari consulate on Prime, but I ran out of transit credits at Hello's. There's no Velhari community here on Hello's. There is a Velhari trader who visits once a standard month. He was here 4 days ago. He will return in 26 days. I asked him if he could take me. He said that his vessel is a working freighter, not a passenger service, and that he had no obligation to a child with no family contract." She paused. "He was not unkind. He gave me the 2 depot tokens. He said I could exchange them for station currency." "But you didn't." "I had another use for them." She touched the pouch at her neck. He looked at her for a long moment. The freighter crew across the bay was still arguing. Someone in the middle distance was playing music through a portable unit, something with a lot of strings. The station's ventilation hummed its endless single note. "So," he said, "a father." "Yes." "Why a father specifically?" She thought about this with visible seriousness. "My grandmother's sister had a human husband before she died. He organized things. He knew where things were. He argued with vendors and won. He knew which people at the station offices were useful to talk to and which ones were not worth the time." She looked at him. "I need someone who can argue with vendors and know which people at the station offices are useful. That's a very practical definition of fatherhood." "I have read about human family structures," she said. "There is also supposed to be comfort and stories at night, and the thing where they put their hand on your head." She demonstrated briefly, touching the top of her own crest. "I have seen humans do this. I am told it means something." Something moved in his chest that he hadn't felt move in a long time. He ignored it. "The thing where they put their hand on your head," he said, "is called ruffling your hair. It means they think you're doing okay." "I see," she said. "I would also like that. But mainly, I need the vendor arguing." He did not agree to anything that first morning. He told her he would think about it, which he had not intended to be anything other than a polite dismissal. She accepted this with a nod and said she would be at the same cargo crate the next morning if he wanted to continue the conversation. She was there when he arrived. He had not consciously decided to arrive. He had woken up at 300, which was standard, had lain in the narrow bunk in his rented quarters staring at the ceiling, and had found himself in docking bay 9 at 6:30 with 2 cups of coffee and no clear memory of the decision to go there. She was sitting on the cargo crate with a small, battered device in her lap, working through what looked like language exercises. "Standard grammar," she said when she saw him looking. "I want to improve my idiom. My idiom is weak." "Your idiom is fine. You don't sound convinced." You said I'm prepared to negotiate to a stranger on a docking bay floor. Most kids your age say things like, okay, and whatever. She accepted one of the coffees. She'd said the previous day she could metabolize it, though it made her crest do something unusual, a faint brightening at the tips that she seemed unaware of. What does whatever mean? I have seen it in text, but the context is unclear. It means you've given up arguing, but you want the other person to know you haven't agreed. That seems inefficient. Most human communication is inefficient. Then why do you use it? He thought about this. Because the inefficiency is the point sometimes. It's not just information transfer. It's you're telling someone you're still there, even when you're done fighting. She looked at her coffee. Something about the line of her jaw changed slightly, a tightening that he was starting to recognize as the Velhari equivalent of someone trying not to show they're sad. My mother used to do that, she said. She would argue with my grandmother about something and then eventually stop arguing and say, there is a word in Velhari, it doesn't translate exactly, but it means something like, I am tired of this, but I have not left the room. That's a good word. It is, she said. I have been practicing saying it. I say it sometimes when I am alone. So I don't forget how it sounds. He drank his coffee and didn't say anything, which was itself a kind of answer. On the third day, he went with her to the station administrative offices and spent 2 hours arguing with a clerk about the process for registering an unaccompanied minor with temporary refuge status, which was the legal category that would allow her to use the station's protected housing rather than sleeping in maintenance corridors, which was what she had been doing. The clerk was not helpful. The clerk used phrases like standard processing time and documentation requirements, and beyond my purview in the tone of someone who had practiced making these phrases sound like walls. Kavak had spent 20 years dealing with military bureaucrats who had perfected the same tone, and he had a specific and finely calibrated method for finding the gap between what the rules said and what the rules actually required. By the end of the second hour, Sci-Fi had temporary refuge status, a assigned bunk in the station's protected housing block, and a meal voucher for the commissary. She stood in the corridor outside the administrative offices and looked at the paperwork in her hands with an expression he couldn't quite read. Okay, he said. I have been sleeping in the maintenance corridor behind Bay 7, she said, for 6 days. I put the grating back every morning so no one would know. She looked at him. It was cold. Yeah. You argued with that man for 2 hours. He was wrong about 2 of the documentation requirements. The third one he was technically right about, but he didn't know I knew the override provision. Do you know override provisions for everything? For most things it's useful. She looked at the papers again. Then she opened the pouch at her neck and took out her 3 coins and held them out to him in both hands. I still only have 3, she said. I know this is probably not enough, but I wanted to offer them properly. He looked at the coins in her gray-blue hands, the worn earth credit, the 2 aluminum tokens. Put them away, he said. Sari put them away. She closed her hands around the coins slowly. You are going to help me anyway. I'm going to help you get to Velhari Prime, he said. That's 26 days away, which is when the freighter comes back. We'll need to get you passage. In the meantime, you've got housing and food credits. When the freighter comes, I'll make sure the trader understands the passenger service question differently than he did 4 days ago. She was quiet for a moment, and between now and then, he said, and stopped. He had not thought further than now and then. He was not sure what he was offering. He was not sure he wanted to examine it too closely. I will not be a difficulty, she said. I know how to manage myself. I mostly need the vendor arguing. You don't just need the vendor arguing. She looked at him for a long time with those amber eyes. No, she said finally. I suppose I don't. He had 11 days of leave left. He spent them on Hello Station. This was not a decision he made deliberately. It was a series of smaller decisions that accumulated into one. The decision to meet her for coffee in Docking Bay 9 each morning. The decision to go with her to the station's small library archive when she said she'd found a section on human family customs she wanted to ask him about. The decision to sit with her in the commissary for dinner and explain why humans put candles on birthday cakes. She had seen someone at a nearby table blow out a candle and had asked what the ritual meant. He had explained wishes. She had been deeply skeptical of the whole concept, which he respected. "You light a thing that will destroy itself," she said, turning the small unlit candle from the table over in her hands, examining it, "and then you ask it to carry a wish. And then you extinguish it before it can do anything with the wish. That's one way to look at it. What is another way?" He thought about it. Maybe the point isn't the candle. Maybe the point is that you stop in the middle of a regular day and you make everyone quiet and you say out loud what you hope for. The candle is just something to look at while you're saying it. She set the candle down and considered this for a long moment. "In Velhari tradition," she said finally, "when someone becomes a full adult, which is at 19 standard years by our reckoning, the family gathers and each member speaks the person's qualities aloud, not wishes, what they already see, what is already true, so the person knows what others have been holding for them." She paused. "I think I prefer that method, but I understand the wish version. There is something honest about admitting you want things." "Yeah," he said, "there is." He was slowly discovering, an extraordinary child. Not in the sense of being miraculous or precocious, in the way that people meant when they said children were extraordinary. She was extraordinary in the quieter sense, in the sense that she had very clearly thought harder about how to survive than most adults he knew, and that underneath the careful formal language and the practical approach to everything there was a mind that was constantly working, constantly cataloging, constantly trying to understand how things connected. She asked good questions, not the anxious questions of someone seeking reassurance, not the performative questions of someone trying to impress, just real questions, asked because she genuinely wanted to know. She wanted to know why humans held funerals when they knew the person couldn't benefit from the ceremony. She wanted to know what happened to soldiers who didn't want to fight anymore. She wanted to know if the face on the worn Earth credit was someone specific and what had happened to him. He looked it up. The face was an old political figure from the early colonization era, dead 200 years. She listened to the whole story with her chin resting in one hand and then said, "He looks tired even on the coin," which was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about the man's portrait. She told him things too, in the careful way she had, not in a rush, not all at once, but in small pieces when the moment was right. She told him about her mother, who had been a cartographer on Myra's Reach, who had mapped the coastlines of a sea that didn't have a name yet. She told him about her grandmother, who had kept an archive of Velhari songs that was now, as far as she knew, on a data chip in the luggage storage bay of a transport ship she'd never see again. She told him about the night on the transport when her mother had started coughing and hadn't stopped, and about the ship medic who had done everything right and it hadn't mattered. She told him these things in the same factual tone she used for everything, and he listened in the same way he'd learned to listen in the field, fully, without filling the silence, letting what was said settle before he responded. He told her things too, he didn't plan to. It started small. She asked about a scar on his left forearm, and he told her it was from the Kepler campaign, and she asked what Kepler was, and somehow an hour later he was describing the asteroid field and the sulfur smell, and the way the firefight had sounded in his suit helmet, like rain on a metal roof. He had not talked about Kepler to anyone who hadn't been there. He wasn't sure why he was talking about it to a 12-year-old alien girl on a cargo way station. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You still know all their names?" "Yes." You say them. At night, yeah. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. My grandmother said that saying a name is a way of holding it outside yourself, so it doesn't have to be carried only inside. She said this about our songs. She said that is why they must be sung aloud and not just remembered, because a song remembered is a thing you carry alone, and a song sung is a thing the air carries with you. He didn't say anything. I think, she said carefully, you are doing something similar with the names. He looked at her. She was watching him with the calm directness she used for everything, the amber eyes steady, no performance in it. The names I say, he said slowly, those are the 9 who didn't come back. I know, but I think the saying is still the same act. You are not holding the names inside alone. You are putting them somewhere outside yourself, into the air. He sat with this for a while. The commissary around them was doing its evening business, the low-grade noise of people eating and talking in the comfortable half-attentive way of people who are not required to be anywhere in particular. It was, he realized, a sound he'd been avoiding. He'd been eating at odd hours to miss it. Sitting here with her in the middle of it, he'd stopped noticing that he was in the middle of it. He thought about it later in his bunk at 300. He thought it was probably because she didn't need him to be okay. Every person he'd talked to since coming off active service, the counselors, the friends, the well-meaning people at the fleet's transition programs, needed him to be okay. Their entire engagement with him was structured around getting him to be okay. She just wanted to know what Kepler smelled like, because she was curious about everything, and she asked the question the same way she'd ask what a birthday candle meant. On the day after the candle conversation, he took her to the small commercial district on the station's 2nd level, and they spent 2 hours in the vendor stalls, not buying anything in particular. She had a commission she'd taken on from a retired navigation tech in the housing block, proofreading technical documents for standard errors, 3 credits per document. And she had 3 documents done and 9 credits in her pocket, and she wanted to understand what was available. She moved through the stalls with her hands folded in front of her and asked every vendor 3 questions. What the thing was, how it was made, and whether the price was fixed or negotiable. Every vendor said the price was fixed. Most of them were wrong about this, which he demonstrated twice by starting quiet, professional conversations that ended in 10% reductions. She watched him do it with the focused attention she gave to everything she was learning. You never raise your voice, she said afterward. Raising your voice tells them you need something. You want them to think you could take it or leave it. But you couldn't take it or leave it. You wanted the reduction. Yeah, but I didn't need it. There's a difference between wanting and needing in a negotiation. If you need it, they have you. If you want it, you're on equal ground. She thought about this seriously. I needed a father, she said, when I came to you. You did. But you couldn't tell. No, you presented it like a want. She considered this. That was not entirely intentional, she said, but I am glad it worked out. He fell asleep at 400 that night, which was a record. On day 11 of his leave, which was day 15 of her stay on Hello Station, someone tried to rob her. He wasn't there when it happened. He got the alert because the station's protected housing system notified registered guardians when a minor in their charge triggered a distress signal. And he was a registered guardian because he'd filled out the paperwork when he sorted her housing, and he hadn't thought very hard about what it said. He was in the docking bay on the other side of the station. He was there in 7 minutes, which was fast enough that the 2 men who had cornered her in the commissary access corridor were still present when he arrived. They were large. They were not as large as they thought they were. This was a distinction that became clear to them fairly quickly. He didn't break anything. He had gotten better at that, at conveying the complete picture of what he was without actually demonstrating it. He moved into the corridor at a particular pace, not rushed, not aggressive, the way you walked when you already owned the ground you were standing on. He looked at the larger of the two men and waited for the man's eyes to find his, which took about 2 seconds, and then he held the eye contact and did nothing at all. This was the thing most people didn't understand about genuine threat. It wasn't volume. It wasn't posture exactly. It was the absence of performance, the fact that he wasn't showing them anything, wasn't broadcasting, wasn't making the face someone makes when they're trying to look dangerous. He just stood there and let them calculate what he was, and the calculation took about 4 seconds, and when it finished both men found reasons to be somewhere else. The larger one went first. The second one followed, and on his way out his hand spasmed and dropped a credit chip without him appearing to notice. Kavak left it on the floor. Sci-Fi was standing against the wall with her hands folded in front of her, not the Velhari offering gesture but the Velhari stillness posture, the one that meant wait and do not move. She was not shaking. He didn't know if that was bravery or Velhari physiology or the specific kind of calm that came from having already survived things that were worse. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, they were looking for the coins." She touched the pouch at her neck. "They saw me take them out to pay for something at the food stall yesterday." "You should have put the coins in your housing locker." "I know, I didn't want to." She paused. "I know it's not rational. They're just coins. But my mother gave me the credit, the one with the man's face. She bought it from a human trader when I was very young because she said she wanted me to have something from the place where the humans came from originally. She said the humans on the stations and the ships were fine, but there was something about Earth, something she couldn't explain. She said the humans always seemed to know where they were going when they talked about Earth, even if they'd never been there." He stood in the corridor for a moment. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "No. There's something about having a direction. Doesn't matter if you ever get there. Matters that you know which way it is." She looked at him with her amber eyes. The crest along her skull was doing the thing again, the faint brightening at the tips, and she was letting it this time. "Is that," she said carefully, "what the hand on the head means? That someone knows which way you should go?" He crossed the corridor and crouched down so he was at her eye level and very carefully, the way he'd handle something fragile in a damaged environment, put his hand on the top of her head, on the smooth scale of her crest. "It means you're doing okay," he said. "It means I can see you and you're doing okay." She stood very still under his hand. Her vertical pupils were wide. "Oh," she said very quietly, "that is a good thing to be told." He calmed Fleet Medical the next morning. "You're supposed to be on leave," the medical officer said. "I know. I need to extend. We gave you 15 days. How much more do you need?" 26 days. Silence on the line. He could hear her typing. "You're not supposed to be doing anything on this leave that requires a specific duration. Leave doesn't have deliverables, Kavak." "I'm aware." "You sound like yourself again. That's new." "I've been sleeping more than 4 hours." "More typing. 4 hours used to be your goal." 4 hours was my average. I was shooting for 6. A pause that had something human in it, the pause of someone who was a professional and also a person and was briefly being the person. 26 days, she said. "What's in 26 days?" "A freighter and an argument I need to win." "The freighter captain argument." "That's the one." Another pause. He heard her chair shift. "Kavak, is there a child involved in this?" He didn't say anything. "The housing registry on Hello Station," she said, in the voice of someone who had clearly pulled a file in the last 30 seconds, "shows a registered guardian filing submitted 11 days ago. The minor listed is Velhari, age 11, unaccompanied. The paperwork was necessary for her refuge status." "I'm sure it was." Another pause. "You know that decompress didn't mean find someone else to manage." "She was sleeping in a maintenance corridor," he said. "Behind Bay 7 for 6 days. She put the grating back every morning. Silence. 26 days, the medical officer said. 26 days. Fine. But I want weekly check-ins, and I want you to actually eat something. I've been eating flatbread. That doesn't count. Eat something that requires more than one ingredient. She paused one more time. Kavak. Yeah. The housing registry also notes that the guardian made 2 administrative appeals on the minor's behalf and won both of them. He could hear something in her voice that was not quite a smile. Good use of leave. She needed the vendor arguing, he said. Sure she did. The line clicked off. Hello Station was not a large place. It had 4 docking bays, a commissary, a small commercial district, an administrative wing, and a bar that Kavak had been professionally avoiding, because it was exactly the kind of bar where he would start feeling like himself, which was the danger. It had a population of roughly 300 permanent residents and a rotating population of maybe 100 transients at any given time. On the 19th day of her stay, a Velhari ship arrived unscheduled. Kavak was in the administrative wing filling out an extension form for her temporary refuge status when the docking alert came through. He thought nothing of it. Ships docked unscheduled all the time. He finished the form, argued successfully with the clerk about a paperwork requirement that the clerk had invented, and was heading back to the docking bays when his general awareness of his surroundings, honed by 12 years in the field, told him that the energy on the station had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that someone not trained to notice it would catch, just a change, a sharpening, voices at the wrong volume for their distance. The dock workers who were usually moving with the comfortable half-attention of people in a familiar environment had slowed down, not stopping, but oriented. The way people orient when there is something to look at that they don't want to be caught looking at. He moved faster. He found Sci-Fi in docking bay 2, standing in front of a man who was very clearly Velhari, older, the crest fully developed and patterned in the complex way that indicated rank within family structures, and who was speaking to her in rapid-fire Velhari that Kavak couldn't follow. She was responding in standard, deliberately, the way someone does when they want a conversation to be witnessed. There were 2 other Velhari adults standing slightly behind the man, and a ship behind them with its ramp down, and the geometry of all of it, the position of her feet, the angle of her shoulders, the small detail that she had moved to put her back against a cargo container, told him everything he needed to know about how she was reading the situation. She had positioned herself so she could see the full bay, so nothing could come from behind her. 11 years old. Kavak walked up and stood next to her without saying anything. The Velhari man stopped talking. He looked at Kavak with an assessment that was professional and not particularly friendly, the look of a person who was accustomed to being the most significant presence in a room and was recalculating. This is a family matter, the man said in excellent standard. She's under my guardianship, Kavak said. Station registry filed 12 days ago, so it's not entirely a family matter. Something moved in the man's expression, not quite surprise, not quite irritation, recalculation. You are her guardian. I am. The man looked at Sci-Fi. Velhari children do not have human guardians. This one does, she said, currently. Another pause. The man's crest shifted in a pattern Kavak couldn't read. He made a mental note to actually read the full Velhari body language file rather than just the highlights. I am Salvedri, the man said. I am the senior administrator of the Velhari consulate office on Prime. I was informed belatedly that the daughter of Miravi, who was one of our colony cartographers, had been stranded on the station. I have come to bring her home. Kavak looked at Sci-Fi. She was standing very still, which meant she was thinking very hard. Is this true? He asked her. I don't know him, she said. I don't know if there is a consulate office. I don't know if my mother was known to them. Your mother's mapping work is in our archives, Salvedri said, and something in his voice shifted to a register that was, unmistakably, grief. She mapped the second eastern coastline of Myra's Reach, the sea that didn't have a name. We named it the Vi Sea 3 months ago when we received word of her death. I am sorry it took so long to find you. Sari-Vi went very still in a different way, not the calculated stillness of someone thinking, but the stillness of someone who has just been handed something they were not prepared to hold. The Vi Sea, she said. Yes. My mother used to say, the sea looked like the inside of a word she didn't have yet. She stopped. She pressed her lips together, which was not a Velhari expression. She'd picked it up from watching humans, Kavek realized. She'd picked it up from watching him. That is, she would have. She stopped again, pressed her lips together again harder. Kavek put his hand on the top of her head, very briefly, light as a landing. She took a breath. Yes, she said. She would have thought that was significant. Another breath. I would like to go to Prime. I would like to see the archive of her maps. It is a good archive, Salvedri said, and he looked at her with something that was not quite tenderness but was something adjacent to it, the look of someone who has been carrying a debt and is finally able to begin paying it. You look like her. The ship was leaving in 2 hours. Kavek walked with her to the housing block. They didn't talk much on the way. There was a quality to the silence between them now that was different from the early silence, not uncomfortable but full. The way a room feels full when it is occupied by people who don't need to fill it with noise. She packed while he sat on the single chair, watching. It did not take long because she had very little. The surplus vest, the language device with its cracked corner, the pouch with the 2 remaining coins. She had given him the Earth credit, he'd argued. She'd won, which was fair given everything. A data chip that turned out to contain a few hundred Velhari songs, which had not been on the transport ship but in the socks she'd been wearing on the transport ship. You had them the whole time, he said, when she showed it to him. I took it off the chip case and put it in my sock when we boarded, she said. She was wrapping the chip carefully in a corner of cloth before putting it in her bag. I didn't want to lose it if something happened. That was very smart. Not really. She folded the cloth corner one more time. It was just the most important small thing. My grandmother told me, the small things are the ones worth keeping small, easy to carry, hard to lose. The large things, she said, the large things will carry themselves if you've taken care of the small things. She looked at the chip in her bag. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I think about it. It means the weight distributes, he said. If you've anchored the small things, the big ones don't fall. She looked at him. That is a good translation. Credit to your grandmother. Yes, she closed the bag. Then she did a slow circuit of the room, looking under the bunk, checking the locker, running one hand along the shelf above the desk. The room was very clean. She had made it very clean. He thought about the maintenance corridor behind Bay 7, the cold grating, the girl who had put it back every morning so no one would know. He thought about what it meant that even then, in a place she was not supposed to be, hiding something she was ashamed to need, she had made herself a space that was orderly, that had a shape. Is everything in order? He asked. I want to leave it as I found it, she said. So the next person who uses it, if they need it the way I needed it, it will be ready. He thought about the 9 names again. He thought about the 34. He thought about what it meant to leave something ready for the person who came after. Ready, he said. She picked up her bag and looked at him. Ready. Sari, he said. Oh. You did well on this station, all of it. She stood up and looked at him. I mostly needed the vendor arguing. You mostly needed someone to see you, he said. The vendor arguing was secondary. She didn't say anything for a moment. Her crest was brightening again, all the way up this time, and she wasn't doing anything to hide it. I chose you, she said, with my 3 coins. I stood in that docking bay, and I watched people go by and I chose you. Why me? She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. You were eating alone, she said, and you looked like someone who had been counting things, not coins, other things. You looked like someone who had gotten to the end of a count and found the number was wrong and hadn't decided yet what to do about it. He looked at her. You're 12 years old, he said. 11 actually, I've been rounding up. She tilted her head. Did I guess wrong about the counting? He thought about the 9 names, the ones he still named at 300, the way the number sat wrong always, no matter how many times he counted it. No, he said, you didn't guess wrong. I thought not. She picked up her bag. I would like to tell you something. Before I go, I practiced saying it so I would have it right. Okay. In Velhari, she said, there is not a word for father in the way you mean it. There are words for the person who feeds and the person who guards and the person who teaches and the person who stays. They are different words because they are understood to be different functions that are sometimes performed by one person and sometimes distributed across many. She paused. I would like you to know that I used all 4 words for you, in my head while I was here. Not out loud, but in my head. Something cracked very quietly somewhere in his chest, not breaking, just making room. He stood up, he picked up her bag and handed it to her. Then he put his hand on the top of her head, properly this time, his palm flat against the smooth, warm surface of her crest, and he held it there for a moment. You're doing okay, he said. I can see you and you're doing okay. She stood under his hand with her eyes closed, and her crest glowing gold at the tips. Yes, she said quietly, I know. He walked her to docking bay 2. Salvedri was there with 2 other Velhari adults, and the ship's ramp was down, and there were preparations happening in the calm, organized way of people who knew what they were doing. Nobody looked at Kavak with suspicion or confusion, which he appreciated. He had been prepared for confusion. Sci-Fi stopped at the bottom of the ramp and turned around. You have 9 days of leave left, she said. 11 actually, I rounded wrong. She smiled at this. A real smile, not the careful approximation she'd been doing to match human social cues, but an actual Velhari expression. The slight widening of the eyes and the deliberate slowing of the blink that he had finally looked up in the file, and that apparently meant something closer to warmth recognized than any human equivalent. You should use the leave properly, she said. Eat real food, drink moderate amounts of alcohol. Those are very specific suggestions. I asked the housing block staff what leave was supposed to be for. Those were the top 2 answers. The housing block staff have never met me. No, she agreed, but maybe that is also useful. People who don't know the count can sometimes tell you things about the counting. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. I will write to you, when I reach Prime, if that is acceptable. It's acceptable. And you will write back. I will write back. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached into her pouch and took out the worn Earth credit, the one with the tired man's face, and held it out to him. He shook his head. That was your mother's. Yes, she kept holding it out. She wanted me to have something from the place where humans came from originally. She said it was important to know which way a thing was going, even if you'd never been there. I think, she paused, I think maybe you need it more than I do right now. To know which direction. He took the coin. It was warm from being next to her. I'll give it back, he said, when I see you next. I know, she said, as if this were settled. As if it were already a fact and the future just hadn't confirmed it yet. She went up the ramp. He watched until it closed. He stood in docking bay 2 while the ship ran its pre-departure checks, while the dock crew cycled the atmospheric seals, while the engines moved from idle to warm to ready. He stood there with the worn coin in his fist, and the 9 names in his head, and the faint ghost of warmth still on his palm. Around him, the bay did its ordinary work. The dock crew ran their checklists with the specific half-attention of people who had done this enough times that the danger in it had become invisible. The way soldiers stopped seeing the danger in certain situations once they had stood in them enough times. He had always thought this was one of the genuine gifts of repetition. Not that things became safe, but that you could be present in them without burning up all your attention on the fact of the danger. You could do the work. You could notice other things. He noticed that the dock supervisor, a woman with close-cropped gray hair who had been working the bay every morning he'd come through for the past 2 weeks, paused in her clipboard work and looked at the ship with a particular expression. Not professional attention. Something else. He thought about asking. Then he thought that some things deserved their silence, which was itself something Sci-Fi had taught him by demonstration. The engines moved to ready. He thought, in 26 days, if he hadn't done anything about it, the freighter captain was going to dock and Sci-Fi wasn't going to be here to need the passage anymore. The argument he'd planned to win was now unnecessary. He thought that was fine. Some arguments got resolved without the fight. The ship lifted. He watched it go. He used the 11 days of leave properly. Not in the way the housing block staff had suggested, exactly, but in the way that turned out to be correct for him specifically, which was different for everyone. He ate real food, or food that was real enough. He found a Velhari food stall on the second level run by a woman who had been on the station for 20 years and who, when he came in on the first day after, looked at his face and said, "You let someone go," in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had seen this particular expression before and understood exactly what it meant. He didn't confirm or deny this. He ordered the steamed grain in dark leaves and sat at the stall's single counter and ate it slowly, the way Sci-Fi had eaten it, portioning each bite, making it last. He slept more than 4 hours a night, most nights. He went back to docking bay 9 on the first morning after she left and sat on the cargo crate with a cup of coffee, and watched the freighter crew argue about the manifests, and thought about what she'd said about counting. The 9 names. He'd been counting them as a subtraction problem. 9 names from the total, 9 missing from the formation. The number that was left was always wrong because he was running the arithmetic backwards, starting from what was gone, never from what remained. He turned the coin over in his hand, the tired man's face on one side. On the other, the Latin words that had been minted on Earth credits for 2 centuries, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. He had 9 names from a company of 43, which meant 34 people who were still alive and who he had trained and who, somewhere in the fleet or out of it, still woke up in the morning because of the things he'd taught them. He had never counted the 34. He had only ever counted the 9. He started counting the 34. It took him most of the morning. He had to actually look some of them up where they'd ended up, what they were doing, which ones were still in the fleet and which had gotten out. He found them one by one, in records and public registries, and in 3 cases, in the fleet's training faculty listings. One of them, Yara, who had been 19 when she joined his unit, and who had spent 3 weeks convinced she was going to be sent back, was teaching at the academy. Teaching the thing he'd taught her. He sat with that for a while. The freighter crew had moved on to a new disagreement. The bay hummed and moved around him. She had stood in a docking bay with 3 coins and counted them twice, and found the number insufficient and gone looking for someone to negotiate with anyway. She had slept in a maintenance corridor for 6 days and put the grating back every morning, and never told anyone until she trusted him enough to mention it. She had sat across from an administrator who thought she didn't have the right to be helped, and she had argued in standard, deliberately, so there would be witnesses. She was 11 years old. She had already survived 3 things that would have broken a grown human. She had done it by being very clear about what she needed and very practical about how to get it, and very willing to ask for help without pretending she didn't need it. He put the coin in his pocket. He drank his coffee. He watched the docking bay fill and empty and fill again with the steady traffic of people going places, all of them carrying their small things carefully, the things that fit in pockets and socks and pouches worn close to the chest. He thought she chose me. He thought the number isn't wrong. I was just counting in the wrong direction. He finished the coffee. He stood up from the crate and straightened his jacket, which was civilian and still felt strange after 20 years of fleet uniform, and he looked at the bay around him, all its noise and light and motion, all these humans and non-humans doing the ordinary work of getting somewhere. He started walking. He didn't know yet exactly where, but he knew which way. She wrote when she reached Prime. The message was formal and careful in the way her standard always was, and it told him that the consulate staff were kind, and the city was large, and there were 17 different kinds of food available in the market near the consulate housing, and she had tried 6 of them and had opinions about all of them. She told him that the archive of her mother's maps was kept in a room with good light, and she had been allowed to sit with the maps for as long as she wanted, and that she had said the word, the Velhari word for "I am tired of this, but I have not left the room" out loud to herself in the archive, and that it had sounded right. She told him that Salvedri had explained the family reunification program that the consulate ran for children who had lost their primary network, and that there were several extended family options being considered, and that she was being careful not to decide too quickly. She told him the Vicey was on the maps. She had seen it. It was large and the coastline was complicated and detailed. Her mother had been very precise, and there was a note in the cartographer's hand in the corner of the primary chart that said only, "The water here is the color I always meant to tell her about." She told him she had put the 2 aluminum depot tokens in a small frame she'd found at the market. Just the tokens. She said she was deciding what to put next to them. He wrote back. He took his time with it, which was new. He had spent 20 years writing reports that needed to be clear and short and useful, and this was not that. He wrote it 3 times before he sent it. He told her about the 34, which he had now actually counted, all 34 of them, including the ones who had gotten out of the fleet entirely, and the ones who were still serving, and the 3 who had gone on to officer track, and the one who was now teaching at the academy. He told her the number wasn't wrong anymore. He told her he thought it had taken him this long to count them, because counting them would mean acknowledging that they were still out there, still moving, still carrying things they'd learned from him. And that was a different kind of responsibility than grief, and harder in some ways, and he hadn't been ready for it before. He told her he'd talked to someone about the 9 names. A person who was trained to listen, who didn't need him to be okay, who asked questions that were different from the questions he'd been asked before, and let the silence last as long as it needed to. He told her it was harder than the vendor arguing and also similar in certain ways. It turned out the same principle applied, about the difference between wanting and needing, about what you gave up when you let someone see what you needed, and that he was managing. He told her that Yara, who was now teaching at the academy, had sent him a message after he'd looked her up. Just a short one. "I thought about reaching out 100 times," she'd said. "I didn't know if you wanted to be found." He'd written back, "I didn't know either." "I do now." He told her he was going to see his mother, which he hadn't done in 4 years. He told her that his mother had cried when he'd called, not like when he'd enlisted. That was a different cry, the kind that meant "I was afraid this might happen," but the kind that meant "I still have the room where you slept, and I never moved the things on the shelf." He told her he was going. He told her he wasn't sure what to say when he got there, but he thought he would start with the food. He told her he'd been practicing the Velhari word for "I am tired of this, but I have not left the room." He didn't think his pronunciation was right, but he was working on it. He'd found a standard language guide to Velhari phonetics, which was dry and technical and cross-referenced 17 regional dialects, which he had read completely in 2 evenings, which was something he would not have done 6 weeks ago. He told her that when he saw her next, not if, when, because she'd already decided it was settled, and she had a better track record on these things than he did, he would bring the coin back. She sent back a message that was 4 sentences, which was longer than he'd expected and exactly right. I knew you would count the 34 eventually. You are the kind of person who always gets to the right number. You just sometimes start at the wrong end. The 2 tokens are in the frame now, and next to them I have put a piece of paper with 4 words on it: feeds, guards, teaches, stays. It looks correct to me. Salvedri asked what the paper said, and I told him it was a set of definitions I was still working out. He said definitions were important to have early. I said I already had these ones. Also, I tried the 7th food from the market, and it was the worst thing I have ever put in my secondary mouth, and I have strong opinions about this which I will deliver in full when I see you, including a detailed explanation of why the vendor was incorrect to describe it as mild. Keep the coin safe. I want to see the man's tired face again. He read it twice. He read the part about the paper with the 4 words 3 times. Then he put the worn coin in the small frame on his desk, next to the photograph of his company, all 43, including the 9 from before Kepler, and he left it there where he could see it. The man on the coin looked tired. He looked like someone who had been counting a long time and was finally starting to count in the right direction. He looked, if you tilted the frame a certain way in the light, like someone who knew which way home was. He got to his mother's house on a Tuesday. She had not moved the things on the shelf. She made food too much, in the specific way of people who have been waiting to feed someone and are relieved to finally have the chance. And they sat at the kitchen table, and she asked about his leave, and he told her about the station, the commissary, the docking bays. He told her about the administrative clerk and the 2 hours of argument. She said, "You always did like winning the argument." He said, "I learned it somewhere." She smiled at this. She passed him the bread. The kitchen was warm. The things on the shelf were in the same places they had always been. He thought about Sci-Fi in the archive room, the good light, the maps on the table, the complicated coastline. The word said out loud to herself, so she wouldn't forget how it sounded. The 7 foods in the market, 6 tried, 1 terrible, strong opinions about all of it. He put his hand over his mother's on the table. She looked at him. "I'm doing okay," he said. "I can see you and I'm doing okay." She didn't say anything for a moment. Her eyes were bright. "Yes," she said, "I know." Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. People going places, carrying their small things carefully, knowing which direction. The coin was on his desk at home, in the frame, next to the photograph. The coast of a sea named Vi was on a map in a room with good light, documented in a precise hand, with a note in the corner about a color there were never quite words for. Somewhere on Velhari Prime, an 11-year-old girl who had counted her coins twice and found the number insufficient had decided it was enough anyway, and had gone looking for someone to negotiate with, and had found exactly what she needed. And in a kitchen on a Tuesday, a man who had spent a long time counting in the wrong direction put his hand over someone's and said the right thing. Both of these facts were true at the same time. Both of them were enough.